Her in-laws shaved her head at the auction. Then a gunslinger removed his coat. The coat was old, oilskin black once, turned the color of creek mud from years of weather and hard use. I'd had it since Abilene, wore it through 2 winters in the territories and 1 summer that near killed me somewhere west of Tucson. There was a bullet crease along the left shoulder low, where a man named Cutter Briggs had tried to solve a debt by way of ambush rather than repayment. The crease had gone dark with age, and I'd stopped noticing it years before. I wasn't thinking about the coat when I took it off. I wasn't thinking about much of anything except that what I was watching was wrong in a way that settled in my stomach like a swallowed coal. It was a Tuesday in September, dry. The kind of dry that makes the air feel borrowed, like the land's run out of what it was supposed to have and is just getting by on what little's left. I'd ridden into Harland Creek looking for a horse trader named Declan Foss, who owed me $60 and reportedly owed 4 other men considerably more. The town square held maybe 80 people when I came in off the North Trail, and for a moment I thought there was a church social going on, the way they were all gathered up. Then I heard her. Not words, just the sound a person makes when something is happening to them and they've decided they won't give whoever's doing it the satisfaction of a scream. A held back, shut tight kind of sound. The sound of a person keeping themselves together by sheer jaw-clenching will. I pulled my horse, Chester, to a stop and looked. There was a woman standing on the auction block in front of Haverford's Mercantile, a low wooden platform 4 steps up, the kind they used for livestock and seized property. She was maybe 35, 36, hard to know for certain because of what was being done to her, which made the age of her face less clear than the age of her circumstances. A big man stood behind her with shears. 2 other men flanked her on either side. They had the look of family, something shared in the jaw, a particular meanness that runs through certain bloodlines like rot through wood. What was left of her hair lay on the platform around her feet. Brown hair, long, the kind a woman tends over years, gone now. The man with the shears was making a show of the last of it, working slow, and the crowd was doing what crowds do when they know they ought to stop something and don't, standing there making a sound that wasn't quite approval and wasn't quite objection, that weak rumble that lets men like the one with the shears keep going. She was wearing a house dress, gray, faded at the elbows. Her hands were at her sides, fists, both of them small and white. I learned the story in pieces later. Her name was Nora Calhoun, born Nora Hatch, widowed 18 months prior when her husband Elias Calhoun fell from a barn roof and broke his neck. Elias had debts his family knew about, and Nora didn't, being that Elias had been the kind of man who kept the difficult things from his wife, because he thought that was protection, and she'd been the kind of woman who believed him when he said things were fine. The debts came to Elias' brothers, Gant and Roe Calhoun, who had been named in the will as co-trustees of the property, a detail Nora had not understood the weight of until they arrived at her door 6 months after the funeral with papers and a lawyer from Dodge. The house went first, then the furniture, then the livestock. Nora had fought it in whatever way a woman alone could fight in a county where the law and the Calhouns were on speaking terms. She'd found herself a room above the laundry and work wherever she could get it, and for a year she'd managed, and then the Calhouns had found the one debt that had her name on it, too. A land note she'd signed with Elias before the marriage had soured him on telling her the truth, and they'd brought that to the auction. The hair was their addition, not required by any court or law, just something Gant Calhoun had decided on, the way men like him decide on things, because he could, and because she'd had the nerve to fight him, and because he wanted something from her that the law couldn't give him. He wanted her broken. I watched him work those shears, and I knew that type. I'd been in enough towns, seen enough of that particular posture, the wide plan of the feet, the slowness of a man who's enjoying something, to know exactly what Gant Calhoun was. I also knew the crowd. I knew what they'd do, which was nothing. Not out of pure cowardice, some of them out of that particular paralysis that comes when a wrong is happening in front of you and you can't figure the cost of stopping it, and the man doing it has a size advantage and two brothers nearby and the law in his pocket. I'd stood in crowds like that myself before I'd learned what I'd learned. The paralysis doesn't make you a coward. It just makes you ordinary. And I'd spent 20-some years being something other than ordinary, which is not a thing I'd have chosen if I'd known the price. I got down off Chester. I tied him at the post in front of the barber shop, which was across the square and gave me a clear line of sight. I walked across the packed dirt at a pace that wasn't hurrying and wasn't dawdling either. The crowd parted from me without knowing why. You move through people a certain way when you've done it long enough, when the weight you carry is in how you hold yourself rather than in anything you've said. My hand was loose at my side, nowhere near the iron. I wasn't going to need the iron for this. I reached the base of the auction platform steps and I looked up at Gant Calhoun and I said, "Put those down." He looked at me. The crowd went quiet in that particular way. "Mind your business, stranger." "I'm minding it," I said. He was bigger than me. Most men are at this point in my life. I've lost the thickness I had at 30, and the years have taken something from the shoulders. What they've put back is harder to describe. A kind of stillness, maybe. The absolute absence of hurry. Gant Calhoun looked at me and something moved behind his eyes, some calculation, and I watched it arrive at a number he didn't like. "This is a legal auction," he said. "I see a woman on a block and a man with shears," I said. "I don't see anything legal about the shears." "She owes." "I'll pay what she owes," I said. I didn't know the amount. Didn't matter. I had the 60 from Foss. I'd already collected it that morning, found him at the livery, and whatever else was in my coat pocket, which wasn't a great deal but was something. "Name the figure." Gant looked at me like a man looks at a stray dog that's wandered onto his porch and doesn't know it should leave. $42.30, he said, plus the auctioneer's fee. I counted out 45 from my pocket, held it up. There's the auction fee in that. What I remember most about that moment is the silence. Not the stunned kind, the held breath kind, the kind that means a crowd is deciding whether to be relieved or disappointed. And in this case they were relieved, most of them, because they'd wanted someone to stop it, and here was someone stopping it, and they wouldn't have to carry the weight of having stood there and done nothing. Because now they hadn't done nothing. A stranger had done something, which let them off. Gant Calhoun took the money. He wanted to refuse it. I could see that in him like a man looking through a window. But the crowd had shifted. That sound changed again, the low rumble now with a current of something else in it, and he was calculating, and his brothers were looking at each other, and the calculation came out where I expected it to come out. He stepped back. The woman, Nora, was still standing with her fists at her sides. She hadn't looked at me. She was staring at a point somewhere above the heads of the crowd, that particular gaze a person adopts when they're refusing to be present for what's happening to their own body. The platform around her feet was covered in her hair. I took off my coat. Not a gesture, not a statement, just the most practical thing to hand. It was large, it would cover her, and she was standing there with the September air on her bare scalp and her fists clenched. And I wasn't going to stand at the base of those steps and talk at her like she was someone to be managed. I walked up the 4 steps. I draped the coat around her shoulders. She flinched when I touched her, not away from me, just a whole-body flinch, the kind that happens when you've been holding yourself so tight for so long that any contact breaks through the clenching. Then she was still. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. I just stood beside her on that platform for a moment, and I looked out at the crowd until they started looking somewhere else, and then I said quietly for her only, "I have a horse. Where do you need to go?" She turned and looked at me. I don't know what she saw. A worn-out man in his 50s with a bullet crease on his shirt where his coat usually hung, gray in the beard, hands that had done things they couldn't undo. Whatever she saw, she looked at it straight, which I marked. Colinvil, she said. My sister's in Colinvil. That's 2 days' ride, I said. I know how far it is. I almost smiled, almost. We'll get your things. She had a flour sack with what remained of hers. 3 dresses, a Bible, a tintype of a woman who might have been her mother, a small leather pouch with some hairpins in it that I noticed she didn't remove from the sack. I didn't remark on that. At the livery I arranged a second horse, a gray mare, sound legs, easy mouth, and I put Nora Calhoun up on her, and we rode out of Harland Creek without ceremony before noon. She didn't speak for the first 2 hours. That suited me. I'm not a man who fills silence out of discomfort. I've ridden too many long miles alone to feel that silence is something needing to be patched up. We rode north, toward the scrub oak country, and the day was still dry, and Chester moved the way he always moved, steady and rolling, and the gray mare, I started thinking of her as Clara, for no reason I could name, kept pace without complaint. When Nora finally spoke, it was to say, "You don't know me." "No," I said. "You spent $45 on a stranger." "I had it." "That doesn't explain it." I thought about it. A hawk was working the updrafts above a draw to our east. I watched it for a moment before I answered. "I was in a town in New Mexico about 12 years ago," I said. "Something like what happened back there was happening to a family, not identical, but similar in the kind of wrong it was. And I was in the crowd. And I stood there. And I've thought about it on and off for 12 years. She was quiet for a while. The land opened up around us, the scrub thinning to long grass that bent in the afternoon wind, yellow going on brown at the tips. A good country viewed from a distance. Harder up close, the way most good things are. "Then, did you know Elias?" "My husband." "Never heard the name until this morning." "Did you know the Calhouns?" "No." Another silence. I could hear her thinking it through, the same way I'd have thought it through if a stranger had just laid $45 on my behalf and a coat around my shoulders, looking for the angle, trying to understand what was owed and to whom and what came next. "I don't have money to pay you back," she said. "Not now." "I didn't ask." "I'm telling you anyway, so there's no misunderstanding between us." That was a specific kind of statement. I understood what she was drawing and I respected it. "Understood," I said. "No misunderstanding." We made decent miles before the light gave out. I'd been through this stretch before, years back on a different job, and I remembered a good campsite near a stream called Kinder Creek, named that on every map I'd ever seen, not particularly kind in practice, but it ran and we had that. I built the fire and she made what she could with what I had in my saddlebags, which was dried beef, a half-round of cornbread from a town 3 days back, and some coffee that had been ground so many times it was mostly dust. She made a meal of it anyway, heated the beef with the last of an onion she had in her flour sack, and we ate by firelight without much between us, except the sound of the creek and the fire, and somewhere in the dark, a coyote doing its nightly accounting. I kept the fire between us and slept on my side of it, and she slept on hers. I didn't sleep deep. I never do in the open, especially not with someone new in camp, someone I can't read yet, but I slept enough. And the night passed without incident. In the morning she'd arranged herself with a piece of cloth from her sack wrapped around her head, a spare piece of calico, not much but something, and she was up before me and had the coffee going by the time I opened my eyes, which was early because I sleep light, always have, but she must have woken earlier still. "You didn't have to do that," I said, meaning the coffee. "You made the fire," she said. She had a logic to her, a plain, practical logic that didn't waste itself on sentiment. I find that in people who have had sentiment used against them, they put it somewhere safe and they operate on the surface with this clean, clear reasoning, and you have to look at what they do rather than what they say to find the rest of them. What she did those 2 days, she kept watch at camp while I watered the horses. She noted without fuss which direction the clouds were moving and was right about the weather twice. When a dark line built up to the southwest on the second morning, she said 2 hours, and she was right within 20 minutes, and we made shelter under a limestone overhang above the creek while a hard half-hour of rain came through and then moved on east. She killed a rattlesnake at the edge of camp after the rain, quick and without drama, a stick and the flat of a rock, and looked up at me after and said, "I grew up out here," which explained that. Her father's place had been working ranch country, she said. She'd ridden her first horse at 4 and she'd never entirely lost the comfort of it, not even through the Elia's years, not even now. She asked me questions. Not many and not intrusive. My name, which is Cal Reardon, a name I've answered to long enough it feels like mine, though it wasn't always. I'd had another name before, one belonging to a boy in Missouri who hadn't survived to adulthood in any useful sense, who'd gone west at 16 and shed that name somewhere in Colorado because the man he was becoming needed a different one. Cal Reardon fit. It had fit for 30-some years, and I wasn't about to look too hard at it, where I'd come from, where I was going after Colinvil. Nowhere particular, I said, which was the truth. I'd had a job in Prescott lined up for the fall, but the man who'd offered it had written to say it fell through, and I was at that age and that juncture where the jobs were getting lighter, fewer men willing to hire a gun hand who'd gone gray, more willing to hire the young ones who were fast and hungry, and hadn't yet learned that speed is less than half of it. I didn't say all that. I said nowhere particular and left the rest. "Have you always done this?" she asked. "The gun work?" "Not always," I said. "I had a place once, north of here, cattle." She waited. People who ask good questions know how to wait. "Lost it to the bank," I said. 1871. That was a bad year for a lot of people." "Were you married?" "For a while," I said. She didn't wait. Not said with bitterness. It was just a thing that had happened, and I'd come to understand it, even if understanding it hadn't made it lighter. A woman married to a man who's gone more than he's home and who comes back changed each time. She makes a calculation, too. Hers had come out different than I'd hoped. I'd been 38 and thought I still had time to fix it, and I hadn't. And then the ranch was gone, and there wasn't anything left to fix it around anyway. Nora didn't offer condolences, which I appreciated. She just nodded once, that plain logic working. "My father had a place," she said, "near Colinvil. I grew up knowing what it was to work one. Elia's ranch was different. Elia's was," she paused. "He wasn't a bad man. He just wasn't strong enough for hard times, and he hid it from me rather than let me help carry it." "Men do that," I said. "Some men," she said. We rode a while. The scrub oak country gave way to open plains, wind-bent grass, the far blue line of the hills toward Colinvil. "You would have told your wife?" she asked. "I did tell her," I said. "She knew the whole of it every time. That was a different problem." Nora was quiet. Then, almost to herself, "That's something." Colinvil was a bigger town than Harland Creek, wider streets, more permanent-looking buildings, a courthouse with a clock that actually ran. Her sister's name was Dora Pratt, married to a man named Wendell who ran the feed store and had 2 boys and a fair spread outside of town. When Nora rode in through the gate, Dora came out of the house and stopped on the porch, and for a moment the 2 women just looked at each other. And then Dora was down the steps, and Nora was off the mare, and they were holding each other in the middle of the yard in the way of sisters who have survived things separately and are now briefly in the same place. There was something private in it that I looked away from. Wendell came out, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at me with the cautious look of a man who's seen his share and makes quick reads. He looked at the coat Nora was wearing still, 2 days later. He looked at me again. "Cal Reardon," I said. "Wendell Pratt." He shook my hand, firm, the handshake of a man who works. "She all right?" "She's solid," I said. "Had a rough go of it, she'll tell you." He nodded. "You hungry?" I was. We ate at a long table, and Dora fed us like she was trying to make up for 2 days of poor trail food, which she was, and Wendell poured whiskey after, and we sat on the porch, and I gave him the short version of Harland Creek, and he listened the way a man listens when he's deciding how angry to be. And by the end he was plenty angry, but had the kind of steadiness that meant he'd express it usefully rather than immediately. "The cowhounds got paper on any of it left?" he asked. "Paid out," I said. $45 retired what they had. "I'll pay you back," he said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't." He looked at me steadily. "I'm going to anyway." I let him. It would have been wrong to refuse. A man needs to be able to settle debts that concern his family, and refusing the offer would have taken something from him, which I had no right to do. The Pratts had a small bunkhouse, empty now except for feed and old tack, and they put me up in it for the night. I was planning to ride south in the morning toward Prescott, even without the job, since Prescott was somewhere and somewhere was better than the open road when winter was coming. I woke up before first light, old habit, and lay there in the dark on a tick mattress that was better than anything I'd had in weeks, and thought about nothing in particular. The way the mind moves at that hour, not in sentences, just in impressions. The platform in Harland Creek, Nora's fists at her sides. The particular weight of doing the right thing, not late exactly, since I hadn't known this woman 12 years ago, but the feeling of something finally aligned. Like a gate that's been sitting at an angle for years, and you don't notice until someone hangs it true and you swing it, and it moves clean for the first time. At first light, I got up and started on my gear. I was saddling Chester when she came around the corner of the bunkhouse. She'd slept was clear. The calico was gone from her head. She stood in the early light without it, the bare scalp catching the pale gray of pre-dawn, and she held herself the same as she always had, straight, no apology, that stubborn dignity I'd watched her hold in the middle of a crowd's bad attention and never drop. She had the coat folded over her arm. "I came to return this," she said. "Keep it a while," I said. "It's cold in the mornings here." "I don't need it anymore," she said. "I'm with my sister." She held it out. I took it, turned it over in my hands. The bullet crease was still there, the mud brown of years. "Cal," she said. I looked at her. "I want to say something, and I'd like you not to argue with it or minimize it or tell me it was nothing, because it wasn't nothing." I waited. "What you did in that town," she said. "I know what it was. I was standing there deciding how much I could bear, and I had decided I could bear it because I didn't have a choice, and bearing things is what I know how to do. But you stepped in anyway. And it's not the money. It's not even stopping him. It's that you put that coat on me." She looked at the coat in my hands, then back up at me. "You just covered me, without asking, without making it a production, like it was the obvious thing and you couldn't understand why no one had done it yet." The morning light was coming up slow over the eastern edge of the Pratt property, lighting up the fence posts one at a time. "I know what you are," she said. "I know the work you've done. I'm not imagining something that isn't there, but I want you to know that what I saw in Harland Creek and what I saw for 2 days on the trail, that's not nothing. You are not nothing, whatever some people may have led you to believe about that over the years." I looked at her a long time. A meadowlark started up somewhere beyond the fence, one of those pre-dawn warm-ups they do before the full song, just a try at the first notes. "It was just a coat," I said finally, but my voice came out quieter than I meant it to. "No, it wasn't," she said, "and you know it." I did know it. I just hadn't expected her to say it out loud in so many words, that plain and that direct, in the early light with my hand on my saddle. I didn't have a good answer. I stood there with my old coat in my hands, and I felt something shift in the region of my chest that I hadn't felt shifted in a long time, some plank that had been nailed down for so many years I'd forgotten it had ever been loose. The feeling wasn't comfortable, exactly, but it was real. And I'd learned enough to know that real is worth more than comfortable. "I'd stay for breakfast," I said finally, "if the offer stands." She looked at me. Something moved in her face that wasn't a smile and wasn't not a smile. I'll see if Dora needs help with the stove, she said. I stayed 3 days. Not a decision I'd made. More like something that happened in increments, the way a fire builds not from one piece of wood but from the way the pieces sit together and the air that moves between them. Wendell needed help with a fence line on the east pasture. Cattle were moving through and a stretch had been knocked down, and I knew fencing and I didn't have anywhere pressing to be. I told him I'd give him a couple of days. He didn't argue. Dora didn't argue. Nora watched me with those clear eyes of hers and didn't say a thing, which was its own kind of argument. The boys were 12 and 9, Lyle and Thomas. They were the kind of boys that a ranch produces, useful, curious, not much given to shyness because there's no margin for it when you're doing real work. They asked me questions the way boys do, all in a rush, without preamble, the important ones mixed in with the ridiculous. Lyle, the older one, asked me if I'd ever been shot. "Couple times," I said. "Does it hurt?" "Considerably," I said. "What's the worst one?" "The second time," I said. "You think you know what to expect from the first one, and then the second one is worse in ways you didn't plan on." He thought about that with the seriousness of a 12-year-old trying to metabolize something adult-sized. "I don't think I want to get shot," he said. "Good plan," I said. Thomas was quieter than his brother. He'd follow me around the pasture without saying much, just watching what I did. When I showed him how to splice a wire properly, not just the quick fix but the one that holds through hard winters and hard-pushing cattle, he paid attention with that total body attention that children have before they learn to look like they're paying attention while thinking about something else. He did it twice himself to make sure he had it, and the second time was better than the first, which is all you can ask. At noon on the first day, Dora sent Nora out with water and food. I heard her coming across the pasture, the particular sound of that ground dry, the grass stiff, and I kept working until she was close. She set a canteen and a cloth-wrapped bundle on a fence post without a word, stood a moment looking out at the east section, then left. It was the second day she lingered. "Wendell's thinking of buying the section east of here," she said. "Another 40 acres. It'd be good land for it." "It would," I said. "He could use a steady hand," she said. "Someone who knows cattle, who knows how to," she stopped, started over. "Someone reliable." "Is all." I looked at her profile against the big sky. She wasn't asking me to stay. She was leaving a door ajar. There's a difference. The first would have made it about her, or about us, and she wasn't the kind to do that, and I think she knew I wasn't the kind to respond well to being pushed at. The second just let the light in and left it to me to decide if I wanted to walk toward it. "I've been a long time on the road," I said. "I know," she said. "I don't know if I stopped." "I'm not asking you to know anything," she said quietly. "I'm just saying the land's there." She took the empty canteen and walked back across the pasture. The boys were chasing each other near the fence line. Chester was grazing near the barn. A hawk was up. I stood there a long time looking at the east section. On the third evening, Wendell brought out a bottle of rye and we sat on the porch again, and Dora and Nora were inside, and I could hear their voices through the open window. The low, particular murmur of women talking when they're truly talking, not performing a conversation but having one, the kind that doesn't need an audience. Wendell poured, we sat. "You thinking of moving on?" he said. "I don't know," I said. He nodded. He was the kind of man who can hear what's in "I don't know" without needing it unpacked. "She's had a hard time," he said, not as a warning, just as a fact. Elias wasn't a bad man like she says, but she carried more of it than she should have and did it quietly, and I think, he paused, "I think she's tired of carrying things quietly alone." I didn't say anything. The rye was decent. The evening was cooling the way October evenings do, that quick drop after the sun hits the ridge. "She doesn't say much about it," Wendell said, "but I notice things. She's been different these 3 days. Not," he searched for the word, Not lighter, she's not a light kind of woman, but steadier, like something's been put back in level. I thought about that. The meadowlark had come back somewhere beyond the fence, doing its last business of the evening. I've been moving so long, I said. I'm not sure I know how to stop. Wendell looked at the middle distance. That's a real problem, he said, and it's also something a man can decide to work on. He poured us each another. I'm not telling you what to do, just telling you what I see. He went inside a while later and left me on the porch alone with the second glass and the last of the light. The door opened behind me and Nora came out and sat in the other chair, and we didn't say anything for a while, which was fine, which felt easy in the way that not many kinds of silence feel easy with a person you've known 3 days. Dora wants to know if you want to stay for Sunday dinner, she said. Sunday's 4 days, I said. I know when Sunday is. I looked at her. She was looking straight ahead at the dark yard, and there was something in the set of her, not the rigid fist-clenched holding together of the auction block, but something quieter, the steadiness of a woman who's decided to let herself be in a place and see what the place becomes. My coat was across her lap. She'd had it there when she came out, not returned this time, just with her, the way a person carries something without thinking about it. I'm rough company, I said. I've been alone a long time and I've got habits that are mine, and I don't always talk when people would like me to, and I sleep light and get up early, and I'm too old to change most of it. I wake up early too, she said. I'm serious about the rest of it. So am I, she said. I'm not looking to fix someone. I don't have the energy for that anymore, and frankly, I never had the patience. She looked at me then, directly. The way she'd looked at me on the auction platform, taking in what was actually there, no softening of it, no flinching. I'm saying I see what's there, and I'm not turning away from it. I looked back at her. The night sounds had started, insects, the far-off sound of cattle, a dog somewhere in town. You see a man who should have done something in a town in New Mexico 12 years ago, I said. I see a man who did something in Harland Creek 3 days ago, she said. I decide what I see. That's sad. I put my hand on the arm of her chair, not on her hand, just on the wood of the arm near her hand, a small thing. She didn't move away. After a moment her fingers moved, not reaching, just there, close enough that the side of her hand rested against the side of mine, and we sat that way in the dark, both of us looking out at Wendell's yard and the shapes of the fence posts and the stars coming up one at a time over the eastern hills. I didn't make a speech about it. Didn't have to. Some decisions don't announce themselves because they're not really decisions, they're recognitions. Something you've circled up on from a long way off and finally reached, and when you get there, you don't need to make a production of arriving. I stayed for Sunday dinner. I stayed through October. Not a decision I'd made either. More like Sunday dinner became Sunday, and then Monday, and then Wendell needed a second man on the east fence, and I knew fencing and I knew cattle, and it seemed wasteful to take Chester down a road going nowhere when there was useful work right here that no one else was doing. That's how I told it to myself, anyway. Wendell didn't ask for an explanation, and Dora seemed pleased, and the boys had been asking me cattle questions every morning, and I hadn't run out of answers yet, which is a kind of being needed I hadn't expected to find in Colinvil. There was a morning, maybe 10 days in, when I understood something. I was in the barn before sunup checking Chester's right foreleg. He'd been favoring it, and I wanted to look at it in the quiet before anyone was around. And I heard Lyle come in for the milking, moving slow and still half asleep the way boys do, and he saw me there in the lamplight, and instead of startling, he just nodded and went to his cow and started in, and we were in the barn together for 20 minutes without saying a word, and it was completely natural. Like I'd been in that barn every morning, like I was supposed to be there. I stood up from Chester's leg and watched the boy milk and thought, I don't know when this happened. What I mean is, I'd been in towns before, plenty of them. I'd stayed in places, worked for people, eaten at tables. That wasn't new. What was new was the feeling that I wasn't passing through. I'd been passing through places for so long that passing through had become the condition, the natural state, and anything else felt like a miscalculation. A man in my line of work doesn't settle. He moves. Moving is the shape of the life, and you make yourself fit the shape because the alternative is to grieve every time you ride out of somewhere decent, and you can't do the work grieving. But standing in that barn with the lamp and the boy and the sound of milk in the pail, I wasn't calculating the exit. I was just there. I hadn't told Wendell I was staying. I hadn't told anyone. I just kept waking up and finding reasons to be useful for one more day, and the days had accumulated, and at some point the accumulation became a fact that didn't need announcing. Wendell bought the east section in the second week of October. 43 acres, good grass, a spring-fed pond in the southeast corner that the previous owner hadn't developed properly, hadn't even run a line to it, which struck me as wasteful in the way that only a man who's lived dry seasons understands wasteful. Wendell had plans for it, and I had thoughts about the plans, and we talked them through at the table after dinner, while Dora cleared and Nora listened. And once in a while Nora would say something quiet, precise, hitting the practical center of whatever we were dancing around, and Wendell and I would both stop and look at her, and then at each other and start over from her point. She had a head for land, for figures, for what a thing actually cost versus what it felt like it cost. She'd been running sums in her head that Elias hadn't bothered to run, seeing the shape of a problem before it showed itself. That had been wasted over those years. I didn't say that, but I thought it. She got a job 3 days a week at the dry goods store, which she hadn't asked Wendell's permission for and hadn't asked mine either, just told us at dinner one evening that she'd start the following Monday, and that was that. She kept the books and managed the stock orders, and within 3 weeks the owner told Wendell she was the best hire he'd made in 10 years. I wasn't surprised. Nora would tell you she was just doing the work. What she was actually doing was the work the way it needed to be done, which is not the same thing. Her hair came in slow. She stopped covering it in late October, just let it be what it was, the short growth of it uneven in places where Gant Calhoun's shears had been careless. She had a way of carrying it, that same straight-backed, no-apology way she'd stood on the platform, that made it not a wound, just a fact of her. A woman who'd been sheared and had grown back. Anyone looking at her for more than 10 seconds would see that the shearing hadn't done what it was meant to do. The Calhounds didn't come. I'd half expected it. Honestly, men like Gant sometimes double back when they've been made to fold in front of witnesses. But Wendell had a word with the county sheriff in Colinvil, who was a different kind of man than whatever the Calhounds kept in their pocket in Harland Creek, and the word apparently reached the right ears. They didn't come. I stopped watching for them somewhere in the 3rd week. That was its own kind of thing, putting down the watching. I'd been watching for something for so long that the absence of it felt strange at first, like a hand that's been clenched so long it doesn't know what to do with itself open. I thought about New Mexico sometimes, about the crowd I'd stood in. The specifics of it are private, belong to other people, to a family that had to live with what happened when a crowd of ordinary men stayed ordinary. I'd left that town the next day and ridden, until the guilt was something I could carry rather than something that dragged. It had taken about 6 months and about 800 miles. I'd squared it eventually, in the particular way that you square things you can't fix, not by resolving them, but by carrying them differently, by making sure you knew where they were and what they weighed and that they didn't run you. I thought, too, about the man I'd been before 1871. The cattle and the North Range and the wife who'd loved me for a while, long enough to matter, and then had looked at the future the ranch was offering and chosen a different one. I'd spent 15 years being mostly angry about that, and then 5 or so years being sad about it, and then the anger and the sadness both had worn down to something smooth, the way rocks in a stream bed were smooth, still there, just no longer cutting anything. I wrote her a letter once, my ex-wife, years ago. Not asking anything, not recriminating. Just she'd had a daughter who died. I'd heard it from a mutual acquaintance, and I wrote to say I was sorry. She wrote back. A short note. Said she'd heard I was still alive and was glad of it. That was all. I kept the note for a while and then I let it go. Some things end at their proper ending, and you hold them right by letting them stay where they finished. Nora knew most of this by November. Not from any one conversation, but from the accumulation of them, evenings on the porch, mornings over coffee, the way people who are learning each other do it, in increments, the important things surfacing when the moment can hold them. I'm not a man who talks for the pleasure of it, but she didn't need that. She needed the truth when the truth was asked for, and I gave it. There was a Sunday in late October that I keep coming back to. Wendell and Dora had gone to visit neighbors after church, taken the boys, left us with the horses and a cold afternoon. I was working on a piece of tack in the barn. The stitching on Chester's bridle had been going for months, and I'd been putting it off in the way you put off the things that require stillness and patience. Nora came in with coffee and sat on the old crate near the wall and watched me work. We talked, not about anything consequential, the store, the east section, what Lyle had done that made Wendell laugh at breakfast. Easy talk, the kind that doesn't go anywhere in particular because it doesn't need to. At some point I looked up from the bridle and she was watching me with an expression I didn't have a name for. Not soft, exactly. Attending. The way a person looks at something they've decided is worth looking at. What? I said. Nothing, she said, just watching you work. I went back to the stitching. After a minute she said, "You're good with your hands, not just the gun." "Most things worth doing require hands," I said. "Elias was clumsy," she said, not unkindly, just a fact. "He was better at talking about work than doing it, which is not always a fault. Sometimes talk is what a thing needs, but—" She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "There's something about a man who's just competent, who does the thing the way it needs to be done, and doesn't make a speech about it." I finished the stitch I was on, set the bridle across my knee. "You're saying I'm not a talker," I said. "I'm saying I don't mind that," she said. "I've had enough talk." The barn was warm from the horses. Outside the wind had come up and was moving through the gap under the door, making the lamp gutter once. She didn't move. I didn't move. The afternoon sat around us, easy and unhurried, and I thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Not dramatic, not full of statements. Just a man and a woman in a warm barn on a cold afternoon, with something settled and right between them. I went back to the bridle. She stayed until the coffee was done. When she left, she put her hand briefly on my shoulder. Not a moment, not a signal, just a hand on a shoulder, the plainest possible thing, and walked back to the house. I held that in my chest for a long time after. She told me about Elias, more than she had on the trail. He'd been charming, once the kind of man who's easy in a crowd, who makes people feel seen without quite seeing them. She'd loved him. She was clear about that. She'd loved him genuinely, and she'd been young enough to not know the difference between a man who was charming and a man who was honest. By the time she knew the difference, she'd already made a life around him. She didn't hate him for it. She just carried the knowledge the way she carried everything else. Square, no complaint, looking at it for what it was. "I thought I was a poor judge of character," she told me one evening. "For a long time I thought that about myself, that I was stupid." "You weren't stupid," I said. "I know that now," she said. "It took a while to know it." I had my hand over hers by then, on the table. The evenings had gotten cold enough for the stove, and we were inside, at the end of a Tuesday. Wendell and Dora already turned in. The lamp put warm light on everything. "You're not a poor judge of character," I said. "No," she said. She turned her hand under mine so we were palm to palm and looked at me across the table. "I'm not. I won't pretend I became a different man. I still sleep light. I still get up before anyone else and stand in the cold morning listening to whatever the morning has in it, which has been a habit since the years when knowing what was in the morning was the difference between safe and not safe. I still have days when the road calls in a way I don't know how to quiet, when I look at the horizon from the Pratt property and feel the particular pull of what's past it. Those days I go and work on something. The fence. The chute I built on the south end of the east section, a design I'd had in my head for years but never had a place to put it. A new stretch of the north pasture Wendell wanted to clear before the ground froze. I work until the pull quiets, which it does, eventually. It always does. What I've noticed is that the pull is quieter than it used to be. I don't know if that's age or circumstance or simply that the thing I was always riding toward, without knowing what it was, is now here under my boots rather than somewhere past the next ridge. A man can ride toward a thing for 30 years without knowing he's riding toward it, which sounds like a comfort but is mostly just something you understand in retrospect, and can't do anything about except be grateful you got there while there was still time to be there. The town of Colinvil knows me now. That happened gradually, the way things happen in a place where you work and eat and show up in the same streets on the same days. You become part of the furniture, not by announcement but by accumulation. Wendell introduced me to men at the feed store and the saloon and the stockyards, and I did the kind of work that gets talked about in the practical way of ranching men. The chute design, the east section fence, a particularly difficult bull I'd helped Wendell move in the third week of October that had given 3 other men a bad afternoon before I got a hand in. I'm not a man who needs to be known. But being known in the right way, for the right things, in a place you've decided to stop, that settles into a man differently than being known by reputation in towns you'll never see again. The sheriff, a man named Albrecht, steady, not the kind who needs to prove anything, came by the Pratt spread in early November. Just a call. He'd heard I was in town and wanted to put a face to the name, he said, which was honest enough. We talked for 20 minutes. He didn't ask me to leave and I didn't offer to. He shook my hand at the end and said he was glad Nora Calhoun had found decent people. I took that the right way. Nora doesn't try to talk me out of the bad days. She sees them coming, she reads me like she reads weather, which she's good at, better than me, and she doesn't crowd them. She just keeps being there. Steady, clear-eyed, doing what she does. Making the coffee, working her 3 days at the store, growing her hair back 1 slow week at a time. What she said to me that morning in the Pratt's yard, "You are not nothing. I've thought about it more times than I can count." It's a strange thing to need, at 57, for a woman who's known you 3 days to look you in the eye in the early light and say the thing out loud that you've been trying to tell yourself for a decade and haven't quite managed to believe. Strange and necessary. Those 2 things aren't mutually exclusive. I know what I am. I'm a man who came to his right life sideways, through the back of 30 years of wrong turns, by way of a debt collection and a Tuesday in September, and a coat that's older than the horse I rode in on. I didn't earn this the right way. Didn't come in through the front door, young and promising and full of a future. Came in through the side, late, wearing $45 spent on a stranger, and the last of whatever was left of a conscience that'd been trying to square itself since New Mexico. I used to think the lateness of it disqualified it somehow, that a right life arrived at in your mid-50s is a consolation prize, not the real thing, too much road behind it, too many wrong turns to claim any kind of dignity about where you ended up. I've revised that. The road is the road. You walk it the way it goes and you don't get to pick the arrival time. What you get to pick is whether you recognize the place when you reach it, whether you stop, whether you take off your coat and put it around someone's shoulders and stay to see what happens next. Nora knows all of it. She knew enough on the trail and she's learned the rest since. She hasn't turned away from any of it. What I've come to understand is that a woman who knows the full of a man, the crease in his shoulder, the years he's gotten wrong, the towns he's ridden out of and the one he's never quite left, and chooses, on a clear morning with all of it visible, to lay her hand in his, that's something a man doesn't deserve so much as receive. You receive it the right way by not wasting it. Chester's in Wendell's barn. getting fat on good winter hay, which he's earned. The gray mare I think of as Clara is next to him. The boys have named her something else. Some name Lyle came up with that I've already forgotten, but she'll always be Clara to me, which I've never said to anyone. This morning I was up before the house was. Stood in the yard in the cold, the stars still out above the eastern hills. The first suggestion of light, just a hint of gray at the edge of the world. I could see my breath. The land was quiet the way land is quiet before the birds start and the day begins its work, that absolute held stillness of the world before it wakes. I heard the door. She came out in her coat now, an actual coat Dora had found for her at the store, heavy wool, dark blue, and stood beside me in the dark looking at the same eastern light. The short growth of her hair was just visible under the edge of the collar where she'd turned it up. I knew the shape of her in the dark the way you come to know someone you've stood beside at enough early mornings. We didn't say anything for a while. Then she put her hand through my arm, not holding it, just through it, the way a person leans into a fence post that they trust to hold. Not a question, not a request, just a fact of where she stood and who she stood next to. The light came up. The first bird started. The hills turned from gray to gold to the particular bronze of an October morning that's clear and cold and going to be good. I put my hand over hers. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was the whole of it.